Good afternoon to everybody in the Loretto Mother House Infirmary. It's nice to be speaking with you again, even if it's from a distance like this. I am Jessie Rathburn, the Earth Education and Advocacy Coordinator for the Loretto community. And I want to say a special thank you to the Mother House Infirmary Council, Resident Council, for inviting me to talk with you again today about recycling and just reminding us what we can and cannot recycle here on this property in particular. Just a note that I am recording this today, so in case you can't watch all of it or you want to come back later and review, you will be able to. This will be put on the Loretto Community YouTube site, so you can see it anytime. So I've got a PowerPoint that I'm going to share with you. And then I also have a lot of items that you all have been collecting that I will hold up in a little bit and show one by one what we can and cannot recycle. But first, I just want us to review a little bit about recycling and talk about the big picture of what actually works in recycling. Is all of this effort that we're putting into it, is it doing any good? And then, like I said, we'll look at the specifics of what we can and cannot recycle here. So I have learned more about recycling recently. I found 3 really good sources that I used to help me today. So one is a podcast that's been out for maybe 9 months or so. And each week they do a new episode on some aspect of how to help Earth. The podcast is called How to Save a Planet, and they recently did an entire episode about recycling that I found really interesting. So I'm going to share some of that with you today. There was also an article in The Atlantic last month called How Useful is Recycling, Really? And then last fall in NPR did a big study that they published about oil companies and how they actually misled the public into believing that plastic in particular would be recycled. So we'll talk about that a little bit too. So if you want access to any of those sources, I can share that with you as well. So first, let's just think about recycling and this question of what is actually recyclable and why are we doing this? We all know that recycling is a waste issue and that many landfills look like this, full of items that could be recycled. But it's not just a waste issue, it's also a climate issue. In general, recycling items, instead of creating new items, reduces greenhouse gas emissions, which we want to do. We want to bring those emissions down. And recycling does this simply because it requires less energy than making new things in general. So anytime we can cut that energy will help us move away from fossil fuels and will help us be able to embrace renewable energies more. Recycling also protects habitat because the more that we can reuse materials, the less we're going in and extracting what we call those virgin materials, those minerals and resources that we have to use the very first time to create something new. So anytime we can recycle, we're not just helping out with our waste streams, we're also helping the climate by bringing down those emissions and by preserving natural habitat. So let's think really quickly about what recycling is. What does it actually mean to recycle an issue? So recycling is the process of taking an item and breaking it down and turning it back into that same thing. And that's an important part of recycling to understand. So for instance, when you recycle a soda can, an aluminum can, they actually take that soda can and they melt it down and they create another soda can. So that is a true recycling process. It's called closed loop recycling, where that loop, it's one item that's being taken and turned back into the same item again. So nothing is wasted and nothing new is added in the process. We can do that with some materials, but other materials can't be recycled like that. So when you take an original material and turn it into a different product, that we call it recycling, but it actually isn't recycling. What that is it's called downcycling. And so it's not entirely as ideal because it ends the use of that material. So for instance, a lot of times with like plastic soda bottles, they cannot take them and create another bottle from that necessarily. So they'll take that plastic and they'll turn it into something else, like a fleece jacket or carpet. A lot of those items are actually made of plastics these days, and that's called downcycling. When it's time for that fleece jacket or that carpet, when it's the end of that part of the material's life, there's no way it could ever go back to being a plastic bottle, and it can't really be turned into another jacket or another piece of carpet. So then it might just have to go to the landfill. So downcycling isn't as ideal, but of course we should recycle things even if they are downcycled, because it does prevent them from going to the landfill immediately. One other important thing to remember is that many recycling facilities, like ours here in Marion County, they're not actually doing the recycling there at the facility. So when we went, with several of us here from the campus went in 2019, what we saw them doing was sorting items. And so they sort them in very particular ways, and they package them and they ship them to a large recycler. Most of our materials here end up being shipped to Nashville or up to Louisville or to Indianapolis, to some nearby large city. And there they'll actually go through the recycling process. So it's really hard for us to know what actually happens to all of the materials that we here in Marion County put in our recycling bins. We've talked multiple times to the people who run our recycling center, but even they don't know exactly what happens to it after it's shipped off, because their job is to make sure that it's the right kind of material, to make sure that it's sorted correctly, and to ship it off to a place where they will actually do the recycling. So let's talk a little bit about the major items that we recycle. This is not everything we recycle here, but the primary recyclables are metal, glass, paper, and plastic. And we'll talk about each of these and how easy they actually are to recycle. So first, when you think about metal, you think about like cans that food comes in, tin cans, and aluminum cans that sodas come in. And aluminum in particular, as well as other forms of metal, it's like the gold standard for recycling. It's really the best of the best. So with aluminum, you can recycle absolutely everything in that can. Goes back into being another aluminum can. Same thing with the food cans. And recycling aluminum has a 95% smaller carbon footprint than the process of creating new aluminum. So it's really, really good for the environment. It's really important for us to make sure that we are recycling all of our metals, because extracting those materials from Earth is highly energy intensive. And this is one area where we really can prove that there's a much smaller carbon footprint when we recycle these materials. So definitely, if it's metal, don't hesitate at all, absolutely recycle it. Another item that we recycle a lot of here and that people associate with recycling in general is glass. Glass is a similar product to aluminum, where it can be broken down and recycled over and over and over again. So when you recycle a glass bottle, it's actually part of that closed loop recycling. It's going back to be, broken down and being made into a new glass bottle. One thing you shouldn't do is you shouldn't put in glass cookware, like glass baking pans, or things like windows, windshields. They have extra protective layers in them that make it not possible to recycle them. But the kinds of glass we use on a daily basis absolutely can be recycled over and over again. One interesting thing I found out about glass is that one of the raw materials we use to make glass is sand, as you probably know. And right now there is a global sand shortage of the particular type of sand that is used to create glass. So it's another one of those materials that's really important to recycle so that we're not overly drawing on those natural resources like sand. The next item that we recycle a lot of here, a whole lot of, is paper. And now paper is a little bit tricky. You should definitely put all of your paper in the recycling bin. Recycling paper drastically reduces carbon emissions because paper comes from trees. And so when we leave trees standing, instead of cutting them down to make paper, they keep absorbing carbon. And so paper is another one where it's pretty easy to see how much it reduces carbon emissions and also protects habitat when we recycle paper. But paper is not something that can be recycled an endless number of times like an aluminum can. Paper can only be recycled 5 to 7 times. So if you have a sheet of office paper and you put it in the bin, it can be recycled and made into a new sheet of paper. But every time it goes through that process, they have to remove all the dye and all of the ink, and that reduces the quality of the paper. So it will end up being maybe a tissue paper or something like that, but eventually it will just go to the landfill because it doesn't have enough quality or integrity left to be recycled again. In the United States, as a society as a whole, we generally do a really good job with paper. 70% of paper that is used gets recycled. And that's enormous. That's a huge number. So if we could really bring up the rest of our recycling to that level, we would be doing a really good job. So now let's think about plastic. This is the one that is the hardest to know what to recycle and what actually gets recycled once it leaves our facility. So just let's look at the big picture again for a minute. As a society globally, we make 300 million tons of plastic waste every year. And right now, 5 to 14 million tons of that plastic ends up in the ocean. Plastic is not a material that can have that closed loop recycling. So again, like an aluminum can, when you melt it down, they can make it into another aluminum can. That cannot happen with plastic. These, the PET bottles, all of the bottles that water and soda and all of the beverages come in, those disposable bottles, every time they reheat it to make it into something else, it makes it weaker and it's not strong enough to be a plastic bottle again. So they actually have to put new plastic, virgin plastic, into the mix just to make it strong enough to hold the shape again of something. So there's not a way to recycle any kind of plastic without an additive. So that is just important to remember. If you have the choice between something in a glass bottle or an aluminum can and a plastic bottle, under most circumstances, you want to choose the aluminum can or the glass bottle and not the plastic, if you're thinking about the long-term life cycle of these materials. Plastic can be downcycled. So those plastic water bottles can be broken down and made into something else, like a fleece jacket, like a carpet, like they're using plastics as stuffing on the inside of a couch, inside of comforters. I know it's strange to think that these hard plastic items can be broken down into something fluffy, but they actually can. So it's not that the plastic that we put in the bin isn't being used in another way. It's just not being used in the same way that you used it. And another confusing thing about plastic is all of those identification codes on them. Those codes look like the recycling symbol, but it doesn't mean that they can be recycled. It's just telling you what kind of plastic it is. So this is something that's really important for everyone to understand, is that you need to really look at your own regulations wherever you are to see what kinds of plastics your recycler will take. And again, we'll talk about Marion County in just a minute. So let's keep learning about plastic for a minute though, and back up and have a little history lesson. I just thought this was really interesting when I found it. So plastic originated as a durable good. It was supposed to be used over and over again, and each item was supposed to last a long time. I still have some TV dinner plates that my grandmother got back in the 1950s when TV dinners first came out. And those plastic plates, they're hard. You can wash them, you can rinse them and dry them and use them over and over again. And so those TV dinner plates were handed down to my mom, and then she gave them to me. And now they're what we take with us when we go camping or go on a picnic or something like that. It's just a nice hard plastic plate. Well, that's how plastic originated. It was this durable good that was supposed to be used over and over again. Well, in 1956, this gentleman, Lloyd Stouffer, the editor of Modern Packaging magazine, at a convention about plastics packaging, he said, "The future of plastics is in the trash can." And this is when we really started seeing as a society the origin of single-use plastics. And he really built this up and talked about how wonderful single-use plastics were going to be for the plastics industry, because then people wouldn't be washing them and reusing them. They would be just buying them over and over again. Also, there was a concerted effort by the oil industry. This was that NPR and PBS study, was that there was a concerted effort by the oil industry to tell people that plastics would be recycled, when the oil executives knew that they actually would not be, that it was not possible to recycle all of this plastic that they were producing. So one of the oil executives was quoted as saying, "We found that the industry sold," the study was said, "We found that the industry sold the public on an idea it knew wouldn't work, that the majority of plastic could be and would be recycled, all while making billions of dollars selling the world new plastic." So the oil executives were telling the world all of this plastic is going to be recycled when they knew that it wasn't going to be. And they just kept creating more plastic to sell. There's also a couple of things we need to understand about the future of plastic. One is that it currently is, and is going to stay, cheaper and easier to create new plastic than to recycle used plastic. So while recycling is very much in alignment with our values and we're going to continue doing it, it is actually cheaper to create new plastic than it is to go through the processing to recycle plastic. So that's just something we need to understand about the industry. And right now, plastic production is expected to triple by the year 2050. So that's why trying to find alternative materials to plastic is so important. Remember that even if you are having to use a lot of plastic, and you think, well, maybe it won't be fully recycled, it's important to recycle whatever is possible. Even if it's downcycled to another item, that's a lot better than it going straight to the landfill. And we do need to be careful of wish cycling or aspirational cycling. We don't want to put everything in the recycling bins in hopes that it will be recycled. We want to put in just the items that we know belong there. Because if we keep putting things into the recycling that don't belong there, then that's just going to cost our local recyclers more to take all of those items out and to dispose of them properly. Recycling is a really, really important part of this big picture of what we call materials management. It's certainly not the only thing we should be paying attention to, but it is a very important piece of how we care for Earth and respond to Earth. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment, and I'm going to go through a lot of the materials that you all have collected and asked me to review. So one material we haven't talked about that I want to make sure everybody knows we can definitely recycle here in Marion County is cardboard. Any kind of cardboard is absolutely recyclable. So here I have a paper towel roll and a paper plate and a couple different kinds of cardboard cups. All of these can be recycled, even though they have like a coating on them. It's fine. Our local recyclers have told me they can recycle these, no problem. So anything that's cardboard can go into our recycling. Another item is paper. Any kind of paper we can recycle. So I have some examples. I have these little paper cups that I think pills come in. I know some people reuse these. I'm not sure what for, but even if you reuse them for something else once or twice, they're going to need to be disposed of eventually. They can be recycled with the paper. Regular paper, regular writing paper, copy paper, all of that can be recycled. It doesn't matter how much you've written on it or what kind of ink is on it. It can definitely be recycled. Really light tissue paper, if it's something in a gift or if it's wrapping another item, it can be recycled. And then glossy papers, you might not be able to see this, but this is one of those really shiny papers. This can also definitely be recycled. And all of our paper, newspapers, magazines, glossies, office paper, everything can go together and is sold together as one kind of paper from our local recycling center to the big recyclers. They just bundle it all together. Aluminum cans, that's another item that can be recycled. The only thing you want to do with aluminum cans is make sure that you rinse them out. But definitely recycle those aluminum cans. They're part of that closed loop recycling where it will just become another aluminum can. I didn't bring anything glass with me, but again, glass, almost all forms of glass that we use on a daily basis can be easily recycled. Okay, now plastic. So I've been given several plastic items. We have a plastic water bottle, lots of little plastic containers. Some of them have are different colors. So I have a green one here that was yogurt. I have a clear container that's like a medicine container. I have a little clear plastic lid that probably came on someone's food tray. I have a white plastic lid that is like for a hot beverage. And I have this sort of a plastic bowl, I believe, or maybe it's a lid also from a food tray. Our local recycler in Marion County will take all of these. And I'll show you why again in a minute when we go back to the PowerPoint. One lovely thing about our rural area is that we know the people who are actually doing our recycling and all of that sorting and distributing to the larger facilities. They are very committed to recycling absolutely as much as they possibly can. Our county actually loses money on the recycling. They don't make enough money to make ends meet, but they believe in it. They know it's important for Earth, and so they provide it as a service for our county. And so they go to great lengths to find buyers for all kinds of plastics. And they also, because we're a smaller county and we don't have all of the fancy equipment that a large city might, they actually sort everything by hand. And so if there's a piece of plastic that gets in that can't actually be recycled, they will take it out and throw it away for us. So they have encouraged us to recycle all the plastics that we have, with a couple of tiny exceptions that I'll show you in just a second. And they will do their very best to find a buyer for all of these plastics. So that's a huge benefit of living in this area. I have found that I can recycle much more here than I could living in Denver or living anywhere I lived in Texas, because our local county is so dedicated to providing this wonderful service for us. There are a couple of things that we cannot recycle. Small styrofoam food containers like this, we cannot recycle. So things like egg cartons or any to-go containers, we don't have a way to recycle those. Really filmy items like saran wrap, there's not a good way to recycle these items. So don't put saran wrap in the recycling. There was also a marker in the items that were sent over, and markers, because they have all of this stuff on the inside, they cannot be recycled. So if it's a material that still has, something else on the inside like this, it's better to just dispose of that properly in the trash than to try to recycle it. Okay, so we're gonna go back to the PowerPoint now. Okay. So here's a picture of our Marion County Recycling Center. So up here in the corner, you can see these gentlemen working on the line, and there's a really large conveyor belt, and they actually pick out different kinds of plastic and put them in the different bins. So down here at the bottom, you can see these giant containers full of plastic bottles, plastic milk jugs, and they sort all of those as a group. There will be several people on a line there. We do recycle some other items here at the Mother House through other services and other providers. So we can recycle textiles. If you have an item of clothing that can no longer be donated, maybe it's socks that are worn out completely, or a shirt that has a big tear in it, something like that, that somebody wouldn't want at a resale shop. We do have a place in the recycling house for those items. We also have a third party that we use to recycle all of our household batteries. So we box those up and ship those away. We have been recycling all of the big industrial light bulbs that are all over our buildings. As we replace those big light bulbs with LED light bulbs, we have been recycling all of those. So again, it's a matter of boxing them up and shipping them off, because there's nobody who does that locally, but we have found providers who will do that. And these are services we have to pay for, but it's something we want to do in order to make sure that those materials are reused as much as they possibly can be. And styrofoam is on this list. I know I just said you can't recycle any styrofoam food containers, which is true, but we can recycle styrofoam packaging. So usually this just is relevant to our maintenance departments and environmental services. They're the ones who receive the shipments that tend to have a lot of styrofoam packaging in them. And again, this is just something that we have had to find a place. It's actually in southern Indiana. And so every few months, I will load the minivan with all of this styrofoam and drive it up to a styrofoam making facility that's right across the state line. And I'll drop off all of this styrofoam and they reuse it and make new styrofoam out of it. If we didn't have that facility in a reasonable distance from us, we would not be able to recycle those large styrofoam blocks. So we're very lucky that we can do that. But again, they don't take any food packaging or any egg cartons, nothing like that. It has to be the big industrial styrofoam blocks. So again, this is just an interesting thing that's happened in the last few years. We all know what we've learned as our 3 R's of reuse, reduce, reuse, and recycle. But now there are 2 more R's that have come into the system that we want to try to remember. So the first one is refuse. If we use less stuff, there will be fewer things to recycle. So as a society in general, we need to use less. I want to be very careful about saying this though, particularly to our infirmary residents, because I know how incredibly conscientious you are. And I don't want anybody to go overboard in trying to use less. We want to make sure that all of your needs are met in a way where you are comfortable. So as a society in general, we need to use less and just make sure that your needs are being met and you are not going to any extremes. And please also recognize that there's only so much that's in your control. We'll talk in just a minute about some other ways that we can help the recycling movement in addition to just recycling. But again, so much of this is beyond the control of the individual, and it really needs to be a change that happens at a system level. So when we're looking at how plastic is produced or how items are packaged, those are systemic issues that we can make a difference in, and we definitely need to try. But just recognize that there's only so much that you as an individual can do. And let's do that and do that well, and also experience the freedom that comes from knowing that you've done what you can do for recycling. And we don't need to let ourselves get overwhelmed by feelings of guilt for not being able to recycle more. The other R that we generally haven't thought of very much as a society is repair. And that's something that we do really well here on the Mother House campus, is try to repair things over and over again. So we're not all having to buy new things all the time. So instead of just reduce, reuse, recycle, we now have refuse, do without it if you can, then reduce your use of whatever item it is, reuse it as much as you can, repair it if it's possible, and then at the very end of its life, recycle it. So I mentioned there are some other ways we can get involved in the recycling movement. There is a large movement, mostly online, called the Break Free from Plastic campaign. And this is a website you can go to, and I'll share all of this information with Lolita and Michelle and Teresa, so they will have it for you here at the Mother House Infirmary. This Break Free from Plastic campaign, you can sign the petition online if you want to, and you can also there get contact information for companies where you can write to them and encourage them to use less plastic in their packaging. So that's a really important strategy, is that advocacy piece, where we try to look at the big users in society and then to say to them, this is important to us, so please don't use as much plastic in your packaging or in the production of your items. There was also a piece of legislation put forward in 2020 that was called the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. And it's a pretty comprehensive bill that was in the House of Representatives. It didn't go very far, but this is another advocacy piece that you could do if you wanted to. You could write your representatives or call them and ask them to please support the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. And that would be federal legislation that helps put some limits in place on things like plastic packaging and how messaging around plastic and recycling is allowed to be disseminated throughout society so that we are aware of what can actually be recycled and what can't be. Like I said, you can reach out to companies or brands that you like or use a lot of and ask them to change their packaging. Some companies are offering refill models now where you can send the bottle back and they will refill it with shampoo or whatever it is that you purchased. And then there's also a movie that I personally have not seen, but I've heard it's good. It's available on a few different streaming services that's called The Story of Plastic, that can just go into a lot of more details about how we got to be a society that uses so much plastic and what the options are in moving away from that, because there really are options. So that is the majority of what I wanted to say to you today. Again, thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you about recycling again. For those of you who do want to recycle from your room in the infirmary, I talked with Lolita this week, and she reminded me that she has offered bags, specific bags, that you can have in your room for recyclable items. And then when the housekeeper comes to your room, they'll know that that bag is full of things that need to be recycled, and they will take it and put those items in the correct bin. If you don't want to use one of those bags in your room, you can just keep the items wherever you want them to be kept, but be sure then to tell the housekeeper when they come that those items need to be recycled. So our staff is willing to work with you on this. If you have other questions about specific items, wondering if they can or cannot be recycled here, please feel free to ask me. Teresa and Lolita were also present at the when we went to the recycling facility in 2019. So they would probably remember just as well, if not better than I do. But if there's anything else that I can help you with, please feel free to reach out and let me know. And thank you so much for all that you are doing for Earth and for the tremendous efforts that you make to recycle as much as you possibly can. I know how much you all are recycling because I see it out there in the recycling trailer. You're doing a really, really good job. So keep it up. And the more we learn, the more we will share with each other, and we'll just keep going together. Thank you so much.